Hello. Nice to see you all again virtually. For those of you who were here on Monday, we talked about how to write a rousing speech, the kind of speech that will get your audience off their seats and remembering everything that you said throughout history, hopefully, if it's that good. And today I want to focus on how to deliver a rousing speech. So how to tell your speech in a convincing way. So as I said before, you're very welcome to submit any work to us through the Middlesex University Dropbox if you feel like you want to have a go at writing something yourself. And at the end, if you feel so inspired that you would like someone, your parent maybe, to film you giving your speech, we'd be very happy to see the videos and have a look at how you did. So great. Okay, thank you for coming. So how to deliver a rousing speech. Does anyone recognize this lady? What's her expression? What is she wearing? I'm going to give you 1 minute to think about some of these things and maybe jot some ideas down if you've got some paper in front of you. Where does the photo look like? Where is the painting look like it's been set? Can you tell from the background where it is? Can you tell when it was painted? Was it painted recently, or was it painted a long time ago? What is she doing? Why is she filling? It looks like she's filling a lamp with oil. Can you tell from what she's wearing, maybe her social status? She seems to have a lot of jewelry. I don't know if those are pearls or shells, these things that she's wearing around her hair and her necklaces. Why is there a toad here? I don't know if any of you have spotted this toad in the corner. What's he for? What does he indicate, or she? What do you think she's thinking? For me, there's a wild look in her eye. She looks a bit troubled, maybe a little bit disturbed, and her mouth is open as if she's panicking. Okay, so this is actually a painting by Frederick Sandys, an English pre-Raphaelite painter in 1868. This is a painting of Medea. So she's a famous Greek heroine, an ancient Greek heroine. Medea is a tragedy written by Euripides, a Greek dramatist, in 431 BC. And the play tells the story of a woman who, when her husband Jason betrays her by leaving her for a Corinthian princess, so Corinth is a neighboring Greek city-state, Medea takes revenge by poisoning his new wife and murdering her own 2 sons that she had with Jason. So despite the horrific and bleak subject matter, it's still one of the most performed Greek tragedies to this day. Helen McCrory did a version recently at the National Theatre, if any of you have been to the National Theatre a few years ago, and it's performed regularly on stages around the world. So despite what she does, killing her own 2 children, her own 2 sons, audiences find Medea to be sympathetic. They feel sorry for her, and they can see the reasons, or some of the reasons at least, for her actions. So I'm going to read you the little part of her monologue towards the end of the play where she explains her reasoning as to why she decides to kill her children. And I'd like you to identify her reasoning. So what are the reasons for and against the murder in her eyes? Alas, alas, my soul, commit not such a deed. Unhappy woman, desist and spare thy children. We will live together. They in foreign realms shall cheer thy exile. No, by those avenging fiends who dwell with Pluto in the realms beneath, this shall not be, nor will I ever leave my sons to be insulted by their foes. They certainly must die, since then they must. I bore, and I will slay them. 'Tis a deed resolved upon, nor my purpose will I change. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that and maybe write down some answers in note form on paper in front of you if you have it. Okay, so I'm sure there are more reasons that you've picked out, but I'll give you some of the ones that I found. So she thinks about taking her children into exile with her, running away with them, away from the place, but she doesn't think her children will do well in exile because it's not a pleasant place to live. And she doesn't want to leave them where they are to be insulted by their foes, she says, because if she leaves in Greek society, because her husband's taken a new wife, her sons would be disinherited. They would be very low status. So she doesn't want to see them reduced or leave them to be reduced and treated poorly by her husband's new wife and the society around them. So she decides, because she bore them, because she had the children, it's only fair that she'll kill them. I mean, it's not a morality that we share to this day. We wouldn't, I'm sure that none of us would think that was a reasonable set of arguments, but there is a certain logic to it. Now, my question to you is, imagine you were an actor. How would you make such a chilling speech sympathetic to the audience? I mean, because you would have thought that no one would want to come and see a play about someone horrible who says something disgusting and just be a massive, a drag to go and see a play like that, I would have thought. But no, on the contrary, people love to go and see it and people feel sorry for Medea. So how would you make that speech compelling and engaging? How would you make the audience feel sorry for you or understand your reasoning? What would you do with your body language? How would you say certain words? Would you portray yourself the way she's doing it, with the kind of wild eyes and look as if you're in a frenzy with this witchy toad situation, or would you do it differently? Okay. So today we're going to approach delivering a speech in 5 stages. So the first stage will be looking at preparation. This is how you build up to your speech, how you get from having written a speech to telling it. The second stage will be your warm-up, how you get your voice and your body ready to deliver a speech to lots of people. The third stage will be body language, the way that you want to think about presenting yourself to your audience once you're on stage. Really, really important. Whether you use gesture, whether you use your hands. Number 4 will be delivering the right mood. So according to the purpose of your speech and the mood that you want to leave your audience in, how do you create that in them? How do you create that sense of anticipation? How do you leave them feeling however you want to leave them? That might be happy, angry, sad, fearful. How do you do that with the way you say it? And the 5th part will be thinking about parting questions, how to anticipate any questions that you might get at the end of your speech, because very often when we give speeches, there's a question and answer session at the end. So this is how to prepare you for that part. So I'll give you a few seconds to just write those stages down in front of you if you'd like to, so that you can tick them off as we go through the presentation, so that you know where you are. Okay, so number one, preparation. So I suggest that you write your speech very carefully using the writing speech workshop model that we used on Monday. So for those of you who were there, can you remember what that was? Can you remember the structure that I gave you? We looked at, the first thing was audience, purpose, and context. So I asked you to think about who your audience was, what their age was, what their educational background is, what their tastes are, and tailor your language to them, because as you know, we all speak differently according to who we are, and we're all familiar with certain language depending on our age, our educational background, all these things you need to take into account. Secondly would be purpose. So why are you giving your speech? Are you giving it, in the case of Sojourner Truth, which was the speech that we looked at most on Monday, to advance the cause of women's rights and the abolition of slavery? Or are you giving it, in the case of someone like Medea, to persuade the audience that the course of action you're about to take is the right one? What's the purpose of your speech? And what's the context of your speech? Where are you giving it? And we looked at how, for example, President Obama might give a very different speech in a very formal press conference at the White House compared with a less formal press conference at a White House dinner, for example. And that would then change the tone, the level of humor, the register, which is the sort of formality of the speech. Secondly, we thought about structure. So if you remember that, it was keep it simple. The simplest structure is the best structure. And remember to order your points in terms of importance. So always put the most important points at the beginning of your speech. So try and get the most important points conveyed at the very beginning, in the first few minutes, ideally. The third thing we looked at was your opening. So how do you grip your audience with the way you start? You need to start perhaps with an image, or you could start with a shocking fact. I remember the shocking fact that we looked at on Monday was 12% of top grossing films in Hollywood are made by women. So that's nearly 9 out of 10 film directors are male. Or you can use humor. We looked at the idea of humor in the opening as well. And I also advised you to be quite careful with humor, tailor it to the context of your speech. Don't necessarily overuse it, because it's difficult to be funny in formal public context. So make sure you are funny and make sure it's suitable. Number 4, keeping your audience engaged throughout. So we looked at how to use repetition to keep your audience hooked, to make sure that they were paying attention throughout a long speech. We also looked at using facts so that you would lend weight to your argument. And we looked at how to use rhetorical devices such as metaphor and alliteration to make your speech more compelling to the audience, to get their imaginations going, to elevate your language so that what you're saying seems less banal, less everyday. And finally, we looked at how to write a conclusive ending, how to leave your audience asking questions as well, and understanding that your speech is over, remembering the main point. Great. So write out the speech fully if you have time. I think this is a really important thing to do, because it stops you from adding any extra words, any filler, any hesitations, anything superfluous, anything unnecessary. You can cut out of your speech just by writing it all out in full, if you've got the time to do that. Secondly, I would then write it out in bullet points on a prompt sheet. So even if you've already written it out loud, it's a really good idea to condense your argument into bullet points on a prompt sheet. And you could even put this on little cards in front of you so that you can have them to refer to throughout your speech to remind you of where you are. You don't want to put everything in your speech on the prompt sheet. Then I would create a PowerPoint show or a set of visuals to prompt yourself and the audience throughout your speech. And as I said, I wouldn't write everything on your prompt sheet on those slides, because you don't want to distract too much from what you're actually saying. You want what you're showing the audience to be a guide. You don't want them to just be reading your slideshow. You want them to be listening to you, ideally. Okay. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. It's so important to practice as much as you can. The more you practice, the more confident you are with your prompts. If you have someone who will listen to you, this is the best way to do it, because they can give you feedback. And also just being there, you can engage with them. They'll be giving you eye contact, and from their body language, you can judge how well certain points are going down. So it's the best way to practice. If you can get a friend or a family member to do it with you, that's really, really important. If you don't have the time, or for some reason there isn't anyone around, you can practice in front of a mirror to yourself as well, which would have a very similar effect. So you can judge to yourself what it would be like to watch your own speech. So that's so important. Practice, practice, practice. Okay. So we know what to say, but how are you going to say it? Right. I advocate always to warm up your voice about 10 to 15 minutes before your speech. I think this is really important. Some people's voices are more resilient than others, but I think it's a good tip for everyone, because if you warm your voice up, then it sounds more flexible, it probably sounds more melodic, and it will sound less crackly. It's a really good idea. I do it at the beginning of a teaching day. Otherwise, my voice can get a bit tired. And I once gave a speech to 80 people, and I was so nervous that I actually lost my voice for the first 20 minutes of the speech, and it became really, really croaky, and I had to have an emergency glass of water. So that sort of situation could be completely avoided. It's quite common to lose your voice when you're feeling nervous if you're talking in front of people. In fact, I would be surprised. I think it would be unusual if you didn't feel an element of a little bit of adrenaline if you're about to get up and talk in front of a lot of people. So it's a really, really good technique. So how to do this? About 10 minutes before you start, I would take a deep breath from your abdomen, which is from your stomach, basically. So take a deep, deep breath, fill up your stomach, and you can do this at home if you like, right now, as we go along. And I would exhale sharply from your abdomen and say ha a few times. It's quite a fun thing to do. So if you breathe in through your stomach and go ha, ha, ha. I can hear you all virtually trying that at home. Another technique is to try humming. So if you go up and down the musical scale, that will get your vocal folds and muscles in your voice all nicely warmed up. So you can try it like this. Take a deep breath from your stomach, and then go. Try this to yourself if you feel like it now. I'm sure that your family won't mind the strange noises coming out of your room. Very good. There are loads more vocal exercises that you can do. If you're interested, do ask about them, or you can just Google them as well, because there are lots of suggestions online for actors or people who have to talk a lot in their jobs, to try and help them protect their voices and speak in the most resonant way that they can. Resonant meaning in a nice way that people can hear and it travels well. Okay, good. I also think you should drink hot water. Sorry, not hot water. Drink water or a hot herbal tea. You could drink hot water before your speech, and make sure that you have a glass of water during your speech, just to keep your vocal folds really hydrated. I think avoid caffeine. That's my suggestion would be to avoid caffeine because it dehydrates your voice. And also it can make you a bit jittery. I think adrenaline is enough to see you through normally in these situations if you're feeling a bit tired. Whereas if you have too much caffeine, not everyone, but it can make you maybe talk too fast or make you forget things, make you make mistakes because it sort of gets you on edge a little bit. And just before you start, to calm your nerves, or even if you're not even feeling too nervous, it's a good idea always to just take several deep breaths from your abdomen, just breathing in and out slowly. A nice tip that a singing friend gave me is to imagine that the air is actually coming through your back when you're talking. Imagine that the air is sort of coming through your back and traveling up into your lungs when you're talking. You don't have to stand like this lady in the picture, but I mean, it's quite a nice illustration of the way the air can travel up. Good. So now let's look at body language. We're all warmed up. Our voices are in good nick. How do we use convincing body language when we're giving a speech? So which of these speeches are you the most comfortable listening to? So this gentleman here, what's his body language like? Let's take a minute to have a look at the way they're standing. So the first thing I see is his mouth is all distorted and quite closed, and you can see his teeth. So it looks like he's kind of grinning, but in an uncomfortable way. So if he's meant to be giving a talk, I already can't really hear what he's saying because he's half closed his mouth, and he's kind of grimacing. His eyes all look stressed and hollow. Maybe he hasn't had enough sleep before his speech. His eyebrows are all raised because he's frowning. He looks worried. He looks very, very nervous and uncomfortable. And this lady here, again, before she's even said anything, she's told me a lot already just from her body language, because look at her shoulders, they're all hunched up. She looks defensive because her arms are sort of around her sides. She doesn't seem as if she's happy to be there. She is protecting her torso with the way that her arms are sort of tense around her. Again, her mouth is all small, so I can't really hear what she might have to say. Her eyes look terrified, and her hair is sort of in front of her face, so I can't really see her expression either. So her expression, which should really be a really helpful way to help her communicate her speech, is hidden already. Whereas here, she seems to be in a completely different mood. Her shoulders are down. Her arm is out. She looks approachable and friendly. Her hand is out, so it looks quite open. She's not got her arms sort of wrapped around her as if she's in a straitjacket. Her mouth is open, so I can probably hear what she's saying a lot better. She's probably articulating it nicely. Her eyes look friendly. She doesn't look too stressed. So, I mean, which one are you the most comfortable with? Which speech do you want to listen to of the three? I think it's so important to project calm confidence to the listeners, because if you look like you're terrified or suffering, like these two, because of having to talk to them, then, you know, unless you're a sadist, why would the audience want to put them through such an ordeal? It puts the audience off. Whereas this lady looks happy to talk to me, so I'm happy to listen to her. Great. Okay. So remember that your voice is an instrument which your whole body supports. Good posture supports good breathing. So it's really important to remember to stand well, like this lady here on the right. And little ways that we can remember how to do that. One tip I've learned is from I heard this off a personal trainer on the radio. So squeeze your shoulder blades together at the back. In your chair, try it now, if you like. As if you had an orange between your shoulder blades at the back, and try and just squeeze the orange as if you're juicing it. And that is a really good way to kind of stretch out your shoulders and correct your posture. many of us will have been sitting down a lot throughout lockdown, and I'm sure that I'm sure that our posture might have suffered for it, not being able to walk around, not being able to go to school, etc., not doing as much sport. So it's really important to every now and then periodically try and straighten it. And I think this exercise helps you do that. You don't need to hold your shoulders back forever as if you're juicing an orange. You can relax them again, but just squeeze them every now and then whilst you're sitting, and that should get you into the right position. Good. Another tip, which I learned from a ballet dancer, but I think it could equally apply to boys as well as girls, is to stand as if you're wearing a diamond necklace and you want everyone to see it on your chest. So anyone in the room could see this diamond necklace from any angle. And that helps you sort of keep your torso open and approachable. It's actually a more confident way to approach the room than to sort of protect yourself by hunching over and slouching. You look more confident, even though sometimes it feels a bit nerve-wracking. Good. So I think it's important to look natural and not too rigid during your speech. You don't want to come across like a robot. You don't want to seem like some sort of stiff bodybuilder necessarily, just with perfect posture and a grin on your face. That's equally could be quite off-putting, as well as, you know, as much as almost looking too nervous. So use gesture, and you can move around. But how much you do so, I think, depends on the context. It's important to sort of gauge whether that's appropriate according to where you're giving your speech. So I've got two pictures for you here. Which context do you imagine the speaker using more or less gesture? So here on the left, we have the same picture that we saw on Monday, President Barack Obama at his White House Correspondents' Dinner, the final speech that he gave as president, where it was actually a very informal speech with lots of jokes. He came across like a stand-up comedian. And he did, in fact, use more gesture than normal. He, as you can see, he's sort of holding a glass of white wine quite elegantly there. He even kissed his fingers at the end of the speech and said, "Obama out." So he was quite animated during that speech. And on here on the right, another picture we saw on Monday. This is Amal Clooney, the human rights barrister. And here she is in court defending a client, I think. So that's a different sort of context. Do you think she's gesticulating a lot, waving her arms around, sort of waving to the jury, maybe waving to the judge? I mean, maybe she is. But probably if the context is more formal, like a court of law, you would use less gesture. So the more animated you are depends on the formality of the context. Okay. Here we have two gentlemen here. On the left, President Trump, the current American president, quite well known for using his hands a lot when he talks, and his famous Trump shake, where he tends to grab the other country's prime minister or leader quite forcefully in a forceful handshake. But when he's talking as well, he uses his hands a lot in quite a kind of demonstrative manner. Sometimes quite an aggressive manner, as you can see in this picture, where he's sort of shoving his hands at the audience like that. He's sometimes criticized for overusing gesture by critics who think that the way he uses his hands almost takes away from his verbal message, that it almost comes across as if he's not confident of what he's saying, which is why he's sort of waving his hands around in such an erratic way. And then here on the right, we have a President Obama again, this time in a more formal address, press conference at the White House. And yeah, he's still using gesture, but you can see his hand is more relaxed. He's just got one out. The palm is more open. He's not sort of positioning it to point at the audience. He's using it in a more open, friendly way, which points back, I think, to what he's actually saying, as opposed to and drawing attention to his language, as opposed to sort of trying to intimidate the audience with his gestures. Okay. I think this can be a cultural thing as well with gesture. People from Mediterranean cultures, like where my mother is from in the south of France, they use their hands a lot to emphasize points, whereas in colder climates, people's gestures can be more reserved. And people waving their hands around too much is a bit too effusive. It comes across as a bit over the top. So just be sensitive to where you're giving your speech and how much gesture you can use. It's also important to make eye contact with the audience. Again, this helps them to feel like they're engaged in your speech, that they are part of it, that you're talking to them, not at them. Obviously, don't stare at anyone too intimidatingly. Keep it natural, keep it light. And feel free to laugh along to your speech, and you can chuckle where appropriate, and that can add a nice relaxed tone to it and ease tension. Although I would be careful to avoid nervous laughter, though, because that makes you then come across a bit anxious and not confident about what you're saying. Okay? So that's body language. Now we want to think about how to deliver the right mood. How to deliver the right mood. Okay. So think back to the purpose of your speech. What was your speech for? So when we looked at Sojourner Truth's speech on Monday, we identified some main aims and subsidiary aims. Now, I'll give you a few seconds for those of you who were there to try and remember what those were. Okay, so I said that her main aims were to advance the cause of women's rights and advance the cause of abolition, that is the cause to get rid of, abolish slavery in America. And I said her subsidiary aims, her secondary aims, were to educate the listener about the general conditions of slavery. So that was her purpose. So you need to think about what you want your audience feeling and thinking at the end of your speech. Now, Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, he outlined 3 different types of speeches. He said there were epideictic speeches. So these are ceremonial speeches dealing with praise or blame. He also said there were forensic speeches. Those are judicial speeches. So speeches that take place in law courts over guilt or innocence. That's forensic for the law court type of speech. And there are deliberative speeches. So that calls on the audience to make a decision about something. So of all these 3 speeches, let's try and work out what kind of speech it is. So we have Sojourner Truth trying to rouse her audience, persuade them to come round to the cause of women's rights and the abolition of slavery. We have President Obama at the White House presidential dinner, which is at the end of his presidency, where he's sort of summing up what he thinks his achievements are, and also was casting doubts over the next presidency. So casting some doubt over the next president of the United States and some blame in terms of the way that he conducted that campaign. And the final picture here, we have Amal Clooney defending a client in a court of law. So take a few seconds to try and identify which is which. So I think that Sojourner's speech is deliberative because she's trying to incite her audience to feel the same way about her. I think Obama's speech is epideictic because he was kind of praising himself at the end of his presidency and maybe blaming the next president a little bit. And I think the final picture here is it is a forensic speech because it's a judicial one that's happening in a court of law. But these are just Aristotle's ideas. I'm sure you could think of more purposes for giving speeches than just these three. This is just one ancient Greek philosopher's opinion. I wonder if you could think of any more purposes. Okay. Aristotle also said that rhetoric is exactly the same as drama. So giving a speech is actually very similar to acting and very similar to Greek plays, because he said that they're all designed to elicit feelings from the audience, feelings such as pity and fear and anger. So if you want to create a sense of pity to the audience, you need to tailor your delivery to that, and conversely, tailor it to the audience. Tailor your speech to the feelings you want to elicit from the audience at the end, the feelings you want to bring out from the audience. Another classic example is Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany. So he had many, many techniques with which he created a sense of himself as a mythical character, a mythical leader, and built anticipation at the start of his speeches. So, for example, he was always late to his crowd, which actually, even though it seems a bit rude sometimes to show up late or unprofessional, actually what that did was build tension in the crowd and have everyone wondering where he was, waiting for him, everyone getting excited. And he also planted whisperers in the crowd. So he had people going around the crowd saying, Hitler's coming, Hitler's coming, Hitler's coming. And so that frenzy and those whispers would build and spread in the crowd until everyone was there. And when he finally came on the podium, people went crazy. People were so excited to see him. There was a furor, a furore. So all of that created a sense of himself as this kind of mythical character. Now, I'm obviously not suggesting that any of you go and do that, but it is still interesting to think about as a technique. Obama was late for that presidential speech again, which was, I think, a sign of kind of coolness or panache. And often if you go to music concerts and gigs, quite often sometimes the band will be a bit late, and rather than turning the audience off, it creates a sense of excitement because you're that bit more anticipating the speech or the performance. Good. So some tips on general delivery. Try not to talk too fast out of nervousness. This is a classic. We all have done it, I'm sure. When you're full of adrenaline and or caffeine, you can go at sort of 3 times as fast as you would in a normal context. And it's just not very helpful for the listener because they can't follow you if you're talking that fast. Another thing that we all do in conversational speech is to use verbal tics. So in linguistics, we call that tag questions. So that would be things like, so if you say everything, you say anything to someone and you say, at the end. And that has a function in conversational speech because you're actually trying to check their understanding and check that they're listening to you. With hesitations as well, we all use them. So I just use one now. Umming and ahhing. A really important thing to try and minimize if you're giving a formal speech. Really typical in everyday speech because it's just a conversational filler to sort of keep the person listening to you whilst you hesitate before you have something to say to make sure that they're still there. But in a formal speech context, it can start to seem like you don't know what you don't know what you have to say, like you haven't prepared. hedging here, that's another one that English people are really guilty of. So that's when you try to create a sense of doubt between, your opinion and what you're saying, and basically you're trying to protect yourself from your opinion in case it's wrong. So I'm not sure, but I think this, or maybe it could be this, but I don't know, blah, blah, blah. They're all the kind of hesitant phrases that English people do, and it's quite often a sign of quite good manners if you use them. Again, it's great in conversational language. It can be great in conversational language, but it's not a good strategy in a speech because you just don't seem particularly confident. Conversational speech is all about creating this regular to and fro. You're really trying to get them to respond. Everything you say, you then want them to take a turn and say something back. So the difference between a formal speech and conversation is that you actually want to keep talking for quite a long time before you get your audience to reply. So that's why you won't use those sorts of conversational fillers. Unless, as in the case of Sojourner Truth, you're actually using them for rhetorical effect. So if any of you remember, do any of you remember the question that she kept asking throughout her speech on Monday? She kept asking, "Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?" And we worked out that the purpose for that was actually to get the audience calling back every now and then, periodically in the speech, crying out, "Yes, yes, yes," which was a way to engage them even more. So the way to avoid too many verbal tics is to prepare your prompt sheet really thoroughly and rehearse it. So that way you should cut out those hesitations. Another tip, an actor's tip, is to just close your mouth when you're not talking, or smile when you're not talking. So I recently watched this interview with the stars from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the newish Quentin Tarantino film. And so you have Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie. And I noticed that whenever they weren't saying anything, they were either grinning manically like Margot Robbie is here, or they just had their mouth shut like Leonardo. So yeah, they were either smiling like that, or they had their mouths completely closed. And that was a way probably to stop them from just contributing in unuseful ways to the conversations with random hesitations and random interjections. Make sure that everything they say has more of a purpose because they're being filmed and it's not a normal conversation. So close your mouth when you're not talking. Good tip. Or smile. Okay, intonation. This is another really important one. Think about the pitch of your voice. Everyone has a different pitch. It's comfortable for different people to speak at a different pitch. By pitch, I mean how high your voice is. So whether it's low or high. So find the one that feels good for you when you're talking. Don't try to talk too low to sound really impressive, sort of lower than is comfortable. Don't try and talk high if you can't, if your voice finds it difficult to reach those notes as well. The most important thing is to be comfortable. Do your key phrases have a rising tone or a falling tone? So by that, I mean, do your phrases go up or down, your key phrases? If you remember from Monday, I said it was really important to repeat key phrases. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So Sojourner's one was, "Ain't I a woman?" And when we looked at Martin Luther King, his key phrase was, "I have a dream, I have a dream." So think about the way that you're saying those phrases. How does intonation is the tone you're using, affect your meaning? So for example, I'm going to say one phrase in two different ways. And I'd like you to try and think about the different meaning of those two different phrases. So I've got, "I'd like to go to the party today." And then the second way I'm going to say it is, "I'd like to go to the party today." So number one, you've got, "I'd like to go to the party today." Number two, "I'd like to go to the party today." Can you detect a difference in meaning? What do I mean differently in the two ways I've said it? The falling tone, where the tone goes down, which was number 1, I'd like to go to the party today, I think sounds more certain. It sounds like, that's what I'm going to do today. I've decided that's what I'm going to do. Whereas the rising tone, I'd like to go to the party today, it sounds like, I'd like to go to the party today, but I'm kind of open to suggestion. I'm easygoing. If someone else doesn't want to go, that's fine. You know, it sounds less certain. It's more of a question. It's actually saying, will you take me to the party today? Completely different meaning just from the different tone. So actors manipulate the pitch of their voice depending on the character. If you want to elicit pathos, what pitch would you use? So pathos is when you make the audience feel sorry for you. So if you wanted people to feel sorry for you, would you talk rah, 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 very low, very, very sort of forcefully and very low? Or would you speak highly and rise up and ask lots of questions? It's up to you to decide. If you wanted to command, if you wanted to give people orders, would you tell people what to do when talking like this? Or would you try and sound a bit more deep and forceful when you gave orders? It's up to you to decide, and it depends on what you're trying to say. Now, I think Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Prime Minister of Britain in the 1980s, the first woman Prime Minister that we had here, she actually had to have a lot of vocal training to make her voice lower, because apparently the men in the Conservative Party wouldn't listen to her when she spoke too highly, wouldn't take her very seriously. So I think if you have a high voice, you don't need to change your voice. You can still be taken seriously as long as you're speaking with good support, by which I mean good breathing and good posture. And that way your voice should project nicely. Good, really good. Okay, now let's think about rhythm and stress. So rhythm and stress. English generally has quite a regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. So, I mean, the normal stereotype of the way English sounds is da-dum, 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 da-dum. That's how you would caricature our language, or English language. But rhythm can vary for ceremonial purposes. So if you're giving a speech, you can disrupt your normal rhythm of pattern of talking. Again, stress as well as intonation can change the meaning of any phrase. So I'm going to say the next phrase in 3 different ways and ask again, can you identify the 3 different meanings of these 3 sentences? So I want to visit the park now. I want to visit the park now. And I want to visit the park now. So what are the 3 different meanings? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Okay, so keen to hear your ideas if you would like to submit them. My personal opinion on these is that the first sentence, I want to visit the park now, is saying, as opposed to just driving through it or going through it really fast, I want to visit it. I want to take my time to actually visit the park. The second one, I want to visit the park now, is I want to visit the park as opposed to somewhere else, like the zoo or, I don't know, the museum. And the third one, I want to visit the park now, is saying I want to do it now, not later, not tomorrow. Good. Martin Luther King as well, when we looked at his I Have a Dream speech, we touched on rhythm on Monday. His stress phrase, I have a dream, is followed by a more sort of fluid, melodic rapid delivery of the next parts of his sentence. And then he comes back again and again to I have a dream, which he says quite slowly. I have a dream. I have a dream. And he changes the intonation each time he says it. But each time he says it, he stresses it and he says it very, very slowly. And the stress serves to then, in my opinion, sort of add emphasis to his phrase. So it keeps getting you to kind of think back to his dream, his dream, his dream, making you think that it's something that he would like to happen, something that's not yet a reality. Okay, excellent. Pauses as well, so important. In normal speech, we wouldn't want to pause too often because you come across awkward if you stop talking all the time. However, formal speech can use pauses to dramatize and stylize utterances, which you sort of exaggerate for effect. In formal speech, you don't need it because the audience can respond to you straight away, whereas in formal speech, it's more useful. So, for example, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Harold Pinter or seen any of his plays. This is an early draft of one of his plays, Betrayal. And he's famous for, at the point when he actually publishes the plays or gets them into a script for performance, he writes in brackets, or he wrote in brackets, pause, or brackets, silence, all the time. So there was loads and loads of pauses all the time, which creates this sense of tension, anticipation. Essentially, it can create a different meaning any time. And those pauses can be interpreted by the director as meaning 3-second pauses, 10-second pauses. A silence could be as long as 20 seconds. It all serves to create drama. So in summary, with the rhythm and stress, if you speak slowly, I think it adds things like gravitas. So gravitas is a sense of importance. So if you talk slowly, I have a dream, you're making your statement sound more significant. Or ain't I a woman? It's sort of adding importance to what you're saying. It could also create sadness if you talk slowly. That's another emotion that slow speed can elicit or bring out. If you talk fast, you can sound excited. You can sort of arouse the audience. Maybe you're going to elicit anger. Maybe you're going to elicit fear. It might get people quite excited. Vary the volume. So you want to have your audience leaning in and out. You don't want to just speak in a monotonous volume the whole way through because it's not very pleasant to listen to. If you vary it so that sometimes you speak loudly, sometimes you speak quietly, you'll have your audience listening more carefully, and you can create tension and suspense. Hopefully you'll have practiced your speech lots of times. However, you want to try and say it naturally, as if it's for the first time, for your audience to try to pay close attention, which is harder than it sounds. But if the more you practiced, ironically, the more you practice, the easier it is to sound natural. Articulation as well. So there's no wrong or right way to pronounce things. I don't think you should have to pronounce things in a proper received pronunciation BBC voice. However, I do think it's important to articulate your words clearly. So by that, I mean pronounce them fully, don't mumble, use your lips and mouth to form the words properly. And if you're combining that with good breathing, then that should project what you're saying, send it out well into the room, into the auditorium. Okay, so and the last section of the speech is parting questions. So as I said before, it's really typical for speeches to have a section at the end where the audience will ask questions of the speech maker. That happens all the time, for example, in academic conferences, where all the other academics have listened to your research paper and then they want to give you some ideas, maybe want to question some area of your research. So you need to anticipate potential debates and disagreements that people might have before you give the speech. That's so important because it'd be such a shame if you gave a brilliant speech and delivered it perfectly, got the audience really excited. Someone asks you a question, you just completely freeze because you haven't thought about the answer. It would be a real shame to end your speech in that way. So a good thing to do is practice with a friend if possible. They can help you anticipate any problems and anticipate any areas of debate, or just put yourself in the audience's shoes whilst you're giving the speech and anticipate any areas of further debate and further question. Okay, great, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. Here's a recap of what we've done so far. So number one was preparation. So that was essentially write your speeches fully, write out a good prompt sheet, and practice, practice, practice. Number two, warm up your voice, get it ready to speak to lots of people for a long period of time. Number three, use good body language, have good posture, try to be open, gesticulate if the context is appropriate, make eye contact. Deliver the right mood, so tailor things like rhythm, stress, volume, intonation, according to the mood you want to elicit from your audience. And finally, think of parting questions, anticipate any debates that your speech might arouse rather. Okay, good. So my final questions to you are, what mood do you think the audience of Medea are meant to be in after seeing her monologue? Are we meant to think that she is pure evil, or is it more complicated? And are we meant to take any action? So I'll leave those questions for you now. Thank you very much for listening. I look very much forward to seeing any work that you might have to submit if you feel inspired by these workshops. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mirabel.